activity in Northwest China นะครับซึ่งวันนี้เราได้รับเกียรติจากศาสตราจารย์ดร.อาร์เนสกายูเนียร์วิจินะครับท่านเป็นศาสตราจารย์ทางมนุษยวิทยาสังคมจากมหาวิทยาลัยบริบูรณ์ประเทศสวิตเซอร์แลนด์นะครับในปีช่วงบ่ายนี้นะครับเราได้รับเกียรติจากท่านดร.ปฐมนันท์คุณเสรีพิพัฒน์นะครับท่านจะมาเป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการนะครับในขณะเดียวกันได้รับเกียรติจากท่านดร.สุรินทร์เลิศโชติสกุลนะครับจะมาร่วมให้ความรู้ในการแนะนำวิทยากรครับขอเชิญทั้งสองท่านครับ
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first keynote speaking session of the 22nd Sociology and Anthropology Graduate Neighborhood Forum, which is held under the theme Coexisting with, in parentheses, uncertainty. I'd like to give you some information about the arrangement of the session before we start. Please be informed that we will be live streaming the keynote speech to the public on the forum Facebook page, as well as the Faculty of Social Science Facebook page. But we will not be live streaming the Q&A session at the end. We also have participants who join us by Zoom and Facebook Live. If online participants have any question or comment, please leave them in the Zoom chat box or Facebook comment section. Dr. Busarin here will help deliver the questions from online. Today, we are honored to have Professor Agnieszka Joniak-Luti as our keynote speaker. I will now hand over the microphone to Dr. Busarin Lerchawalisakun, who is my colleague in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, who invited Professor Joniak-Luti to join us today. Dr. Busarin will give a brief introduction of Professor to us.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Pathamathan. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me introduce Professor Agnieszka Joniak-Luti. She is a professor in social anthropology at the University of Freiburg, Switzerland. She earned her master's degree in Chinese studies from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poland. She then chose to pursue a PhD in social anthropology at the University of Bern, Switzerland. Drawing on her educational background and years of scholarly experiences, she has grown her academic interest to cover a broad range of topics, including the theme of ethnic identity, politics of ethnicity, state and the mundane process, anthropology of place, space, and spatial transformation. In recent years, Professor Joniak-Luti has developed an interest in anthropology of infrastructure, in particular researching roads from a social science perspective. In terms of geographical focus, Professor Joniak-Luti has continually conducted research in the People's Republic of China. The output from a significant period of research is the book entitled The Han, China's Diverse Majorities, which was published by the University of Washington Press in 2015. She also followed the relations between majority and minority groups in China, especially those living in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, with her curiosity also extending to Central Asia and the power centralization of the Chinese government by means of infrastructure development. She has published extensively on this topic and theme in the international journals such as Asian Ethnicity, Modern Asian Studies, Ethnic and Racial Studies, and Political Geography. At present, Professor Joniak-Luti is following the recent development project by the Chinese government widely known as the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. She acted as the head of the research project Roadworks, an anthropology of infrastructure at China's Indo-Asian borders, which was funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation between 2018 and 2022. Last but not least, Professor Joniak-Luti is one of the core editorial members of the journal Road Science, which welcomes manuscripts dealing with debates and research in multiple aspects of infrastructure. Today, we are honored to have Professor Joniak-Luti with us to deliver keynote address that is freshly done from her recent research project. Please welcome Professor Joniak-Luti. Thank you.
Topic of my talk is ethnicizing infrastructure, roads, railways, and differential mobility in northwest China. I'm going to talk about infrastructure, ethnicity, inequalities, exclusions, different types of inequalities and exclusions that manifest themselves in mobility and through infrastructure. And I'm sure you have a lot of examples from the places that you come from of the ways in which either ethnicity or other subjectivities, mobility, travel, infrastructure intersect. There will be time for it to talk about it a bit more in the Q&A. I'm going to talk more about Northwest China. This is where I have my field work, but I'm very curious to hear about other places and the ways in which infrastructure and social relations intersect. So us recently, us 15 or 20 years ago, traveling in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which you see on this map in northwest China, traveling was mostly done on sand, stone, or gravel, or in a roadless terrain across vast. Oh, they are not full screen, my slides. Interesting. They are full screen on my computer, but not on yours. Right, like this. Is it good now? Okay. Oh, very interesting. Good. Xinjiang, I don't know how much you know about Xinjiang. Xinjiang is 3 times as large as Thailand, but is inhabited only by around 25 million people. This is because 95% or more than 95% of the region is covered by stone and sand deserts or mountains. Water is a scarce resource in Xinjiang. Humans have traditionally lived and also live today in the oases situated at the rim of the huge deserts that make up both the center of southern and northern Xinjiang. On the map that I show you now, you see southern Xinjiang, at the center of which there is the huge Taklamakan Desert, the second largest sand desert in the world. And you see that the oasis cities, early towns today, cities such as Korla or Kashgar or Khotan, they are located at the rim of the desert, there where the water coming down from the mountains made irrigated agriculture possible. Population, let's say something about the population. The Muslim Uyghurs, as you see on this map, number 11.6 million today, are the largest ethnic group in Xinjiang. The second largest are the Han Chinese with nearly 11 million. The numbers that you see in this table, the comparison between 1949 and 2020, make clear that most of the Han Chinese in Xinjiang are either settlers themselves or descendants of the settlers who settled in the region after 1949. 1949 is the year in which the People's Republic of China, with Xinjiang in its borders, was founded. In 1949, as you see that 1949, 60% of the population today, they are insignificant 42%. Other ethnic groups inhabiting the region are the Dogons or Hui or Chinese Muslims, as they are sometimes referred to. There are also Kazakhs, Mongols, Russian, Kyrgyz, Tibetans, and many others. Xinjiang, which in translation from Chinese means a new frontier, is geopolitically, of course, of utmost importance to China. It borders 8 countries, some of them you see here. It's Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also India. As you all know, Xinjiang has been a restive region. Many of the Uyghurs and other non-Han expressed discontent with how the region was managed administratively by the Chinese state since 1949. The massive resettlement of Han Chinese from eastern China to Xinjiang since the 1950s, which was visible in the population table, has been a source of great resentment. So is the introduction of Chinese as the only language of instruction in the schools, the project that was initiated more than a decade ago and is, I believe, accomplished by now. But also the ways in which Xinjiang's resources such as natural gas, oil, coal, and uranium and potash also are exploited for the Chinese economy without my concern for the inhabitants of the region or the ecological damage is, of course, a source of tensions too. The list of points of tension is long, as is the list of violent unrest in the region. Following the infrastructure investment related to various development programs since the early 2000s, and the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013, many thousands of kilometers of roads and railways have been built in Xinjiang, upgraded, despite this volatile social political situation. I have some numbers for you again. You see here that the total length of roads in Xinjiang increased within 20 years, basically, from 1999 to 2017, from 33,000 kilometers to 186,000 kilometers, and today probably around 200,000 kilometers. And in a similar time span, the total length of expressways in Xinjiang increased from 170 kilometers to 4,500 kilometers in 2017. And I saw some numbers on the internet that say that in 2022, the length of the expressways reached around 10,000 kilometers. Railroads have expanded at a slower pace than highways, but still in southern Xinjiang, the loop around the Taklamakan Desert, which you see on this map, is complete, as is the connection eastwards towards the Tibetan province of Qinghai, where the railway network connects with the national train network. In the nomenclature of the Belt and Road Initiative, Xinjiang is considered to be a corridor that should facilitate the flows of goods between eastern China and the Eurasian continent. Xinjiang is thus crucial to the initiative as a gateway to the land and sea routes which are to link or which are linking China with Central Asia and then further with the Middle East, Europe and Africa. On maps such as this one, the new and upgraded roads are cartographically represented as neat continuous lines. These are these white lines here on the map. These lines are apparently available in the same way to all. Also, in another realm of representation, for example, in such photographic depictions of roads on the website of the China Road and Bridge Corporation and China State Construction and other Chinese companies, the viewers are confronted mounted with images of smooth and open roads stretching off to the horizon. The status of such roads is ambiguous. We don't know, are they already built or are they merely a photoshopped projection of a perfect infrastructural future? As with maps, no human or animal presence disturbs this clear geometry of lines. But of course, the everyday practices of mobility are significantly more complex than what this kind of images and also what maps seem to suggest. For example, the maps and official images never show the hundreds or perhaps even thousands of police roadblocks or checkpoints that exist along these smooth new roads, sometimes even preceding their construction, as you see on this picture. Though Xinjiang is a restive border region that had never been roadblock or checkpoints free, they have truly proliferated since 2013, which is since the time when the Belt and Road Initiative was launched. Roadblocks are located at county borders, on access roads to cities, towns, on village roads, on border roads, on expressways, on provincial roads, nearly really everywhere. They differ in appearance. Sometimes they are simply a rope that is spread across the road between the chairs on which police officers sit. And at other locations, like here on the picture, they are firmly inscribed in the place and marked by barriers, roadside shelters, and other buildings. The task of the roadblocks is to classify the travelers into those who are allowed to travel or to move along the state-built roads, and those who are not, or who are less desired as the mobile subjects. The three criteria according to which people are classified at the roadblocks in Xinjiang are their nationality, or minzu in Chinese, their household registration, hukou in Chinese, and paternal ancestral origin, ji. Being of a Muslim nationality, having a rural household registration in southern Xinjiang, and having a paternal origin in Xinjiang makes traveling very difficult, if not impossible. It is relatively easy to pass those roadblocks for the Han Chinese living in Xinjiang because few of them have a rural household registration. Most Han live either in cities or on the farms of the production and construction corps, which have many of which have recently been upgraded to urban areas. Because an overwhelming majority of the Han Chinese in Xinjiang have their paternal origin outside of the region, they are settlers or immigrants. They are also not affected by the last criteria here. Those who typically remain on the sieve, who are blocked or need a very long time to pass through the checkpoints, thus Muslims or members of Muslim nationalities, those with a rural household registration, and those with their origin in Xinjiang. These are the people that the government wants to keep away from the new roads and makes their mobility very difficult. Thus, the nationality, or in this context we can also say ethnicity of an individual, their household registration and paternal origin have a determining impact on where, how far, and also how quickly an individual is effectively able to travel. In 2015, 2 years after the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, whose declared aim is to facilitate mobility, the control of movement in Xinjiang intensified further with the introduction of the so-called convenient citizen cards. Xinjiang. So anyone wishing to travel beyond the immediate vicinity of the villages or towns had to apply for this card first at the local government, and upon being granted it, was able to travel. When their application was refused, they were not able to move and would basically be stopped at the first checkpoint. Together with the introduction of the convenient citizen cards, the rigidity of the checks and the presence of heavily armed police personnel has increased. Even between my research days in 2015 and 16, the change was significant. Since then, the proliferation of roadblocks outside of urban areas has been paralleled by the construction of police stations at every new crossing in the cities, towns, and also villages, by omnipresent surveillance cameras, the regular iris checks and ID checks, and also mobile phones at the entrance to almost all buildings like schools, universities, or even shopping centers. After the appointment of Chen Quanguo as the party secretary of Xinjiang in 2016, restrictions on mobility for the Muslim population ramped up further. As you know, there are mass detention in re-education camps and prisons and other forms of state exclusion and violence. Among those illegally detained are also our fellow anthropologists from the universities in Xinjiang, as well as other academics. As you all know, the Chinese government has for a long time and rather cynically referred to those re-education camps as vocational training centers. So what does it all have to do with transport, and what does it mean in terms of transport infrastructure, mobility and travel? The situation could not be more paradoxical. The investment in transport infrastructure in Xinjiang over the past decade or a bit more has been huge, and so the infrastructure to potentially go anywhere is in place. However, few Uyghurs, Kazakhs and other Muslims, of which the population is nearly 14 million, few of them are actually really able to travel wherever they want to. In addition to those who cannot move because they are detained, others are basically incarcerated in their villages and towns and not free to journey on any kind of road either, whether an old and potholed one or a new and shiny one. But it is not this and other related paradoxes that I want to explore today. Instead, I would like to focus on a related but different phenomenon at the intersection of ethnicity and transport infrastructure, namely on the association of some means of transportation, such as buses and trains, with quasi-ethnic identities. I would like to explore the ways in which the travel is embroiled in discourses and performances of ethnicity. I draw on the material that I collected my 10-month ethnographic fieldwork a decade ago. This is when I started to do my research in Xinjiang, and then this long stay was followed by shorter 2-month stays in 2015 and 2016, after which the research became impossible politically. During my fieldwork, I focused on the Uyghur-dominated southern Xinjiang, which you saw on the maps before. I conducted around 400 conversations about infrastructure, mobility, travel, with Uyghur and Han interlocutors, so I discussed this issue with members of both ethnic groups. I also regularly traveled using various means of transport such as trains, buses, long-distance buses, sleeper buses, collective taxis, cabs, private cars of my Han and Uyghur interlocutors, and also cars of my academic collaborators. The aim of this ethnography on the road was to get an insight into the mobility practices of my research participants, in addition, of course, to listening to their stories about it. As we know, what people say and what they actually do is actually quite different, or usually it's quite different, also because many bodily experiences cannot be that well captured in words. So what I tried to do was to learn about travel through different eyes, Han and Uyghur villages, government officials, business people, students, academics, farmers, and others. I also extensively walked along roads, both being a passenger and walking along was crucial to experience the realities of travel with my own body. For example, it was important for me to experience the sense of insecurity that one has at the roadblocks, when one is stopped at the roadblock, when one's documents are checked, and also to experience the smoothness of asphalt after having driven for a long time, for example, on a sand road or on a stone road. Also the feeling of my shoe soles melting on an asphalt road across the Taklamakan desert, similarly also to the tires of the cars and trucks that dared to drive this road during the day. This was most insightful. So my fieldwork was a combination of a variety of methods with this kind of embodied ethnography playing an important role in it. New roads and railways in Xinjiang, as also elsewhere in the world, are often advertised in state and corporate language as harbingers of development, modernity and prosperity for all. Xinjiang's roadsides and highway bridges are stuck with huge banners stating, for example, as you see on the slide, if you want to become wealthy, build a road first. Or another one that I found in my field notes, a bit more poetic perhaps, when roads are built, feelings can connect. When roads are built, wealth can travel along them. Mr. Abdul Karim, one of my government interlocutors in southern Xinjiang who drove me around to show me this development, said in a similar turn of phrase. The plan of the government is to connect all villages by roads and to link them to water pipelines and TV broadcasting. Look, this road was a dirt track until recently. Now it is paved. See how convenient it has become. There is a saying in Uyghur: if you want wealth to come, first build a road. When there are no roads, people can't connect. In Chinese, he spoke in Chinese. Roads bring education, economic development. Look, there is a taxi in front of us. Previously, there were no taxis in the countryside. No taxi would come down here. The roads were too bad. It has become so convenient now. People can go to the bazaar, sell their products. Now the government cares about the countryside. The countryside used to have only dirt roads, and the towns had asphalt. Now it's the same for all. The differences were evened out. Everybody has asphalt now. So in the slogans and also in Mr. Abdul Karim's speech, technologies such as roads are represented as clean objects separated from the politics of the everyday and unaffected by the historical, social and political terrain in which they are embedded. If agentive, so if they are imagined to do things, they are thought of as having effects that can be clearly delineated and defined. For example, they bring wealth, development, education. In contrast to such clean understanding of technology, I suggest thinking infrastructure such as roads as places in which specific social relations intersect and accumulate over time, forming unique social, material, political terrain. For the purpose of today's talk, I draw on this idea of mine as well as on the proposition of Harvey, Jensen, and Morita to think infrastructure as extended material assemblages that generate effects and structure social relations, either through engineered or non-engineered activities. So I consider infrastructures such as roads to be an accumulation of social, political, cultural, and also material relations that then affect the experience of the individuals who travel along them. This thinking, this concept of roads helped me make sense of the research material that I will present. Harvey, Jensen, and Morita, so what they argue, on the other hand, emphasizes a different aspect of infrastructure. They emphasize that the engineered, the planned effects of infrastructure, so in other words, what they are expected to do, these are important, but they rarely outnumber the flurry of unforeseen and unplanned effects, and also other resonances. We can't always very clearly talk of effects, but roads resonate in various ways. So these unplanned resonances and effects usually outnumber the planned and programmed effects in everyday life. Ethnicization of infrastructure, so ascription of ethnic identities to buses and trains or rail trucks and roads, which I will discuss, is one such unplanned resonance, unforeseen resonance of infrastructure construction. In regions ridden with ethnic conflict, like Xinjiang, infrastructures rarely escape unscathed. This is something that perhaps road and railway constructors rarely think of, but these issues are extremely important. They affect the ways in which the roads are perceived, they are used, and whether they are taken care of or not. One of the topics that came up frequently in conversations about travel with both my Uyghur and Han Chinese interlocutors was their preference for one or another means of transport. The debate centered on trains as opposed to buses, long-distance buses. I was told by the overwhelming majority of my Han Chinese interlocutors that they preferred to travel by train rather than long-distance or sleeper bus. They considered buses in southern Xinjiang as dirty or inconvenient. So dirty in Chinese is called dang, and inconvenient 不方便. The majority of my Uyghur interlocutors, on the other hand, emphasized that they preferred, exactly on the contrary, going by bus. They found buses clean and convenient, and trains dirty and inconvenient. The word inconvenient, or 不方便 in Chinese, was used by both my Han and Uyghur interlocutors when talking to me. It is a polite word, that in this case indicates situations that feel awkward and are not in accordance with popular norms as to what is proper and right. For example, an Uyghur colleague of mine said that it was inconvenient for her to attend the wedding of her Han Chinese colleague, where pork would be served and where people would be drinking heavily. She wouldn't feel comfortable in that environment. So it would be inconvenient for her to attend. Remarkably, also a few of my Han Chinese interlocutors who had grown up in southern Xinjiang in multi-ethnic communities together with the Uyghurs explicitly said, like the Uyghurs, that they enjoyed traveling by bus. There were, of course, some gender and class differences in those preferences. For example, middle-class Uyghurs and Han expressed a preference for planes or for driving an own car. State employees who can reimburse train tickets but not bus tickets highlighted the comfort of train rides generally. And for young, unmarried Uyghur women traveling alone for work or study, planes were considered morally the least ambiguous environment and were thus preferred, even if they were also most expensive. The actual use of transport was much more diverse and flexible than the discourse about it, and decisions regarding travel were made pragmatically, depending on the concrete situation. All the differences in the actual ways of traveling notwithstanding, the opinions articulated were clear. When asked about the travel preferences, most of the Han Chinese interlocutors argued that trains were better than buses because they were comfortable and clean. And the majority of my Uyghur interlocutors claimed very much on the contrary, that it was the sleeper and other long-distance buses that were fast, comfortable, and clean. I prepared an excerpt from a conversation with an Uyghur driver of a collective taxi during a 6-hour ride between the city of Kashgar in the west of Xinjiang and the town of Tashqargam at the border to Pakistan, not exactly at the border, but close to the border to Pakistan, as one of this broadly circulating idea. So I asked, how do you usually travel? And the driver said, I drive my own car. This is the most convenient way. When you are tired, you can stop and sleep. You don't have to travel with many people. I hate trains. Trains are so crowded. There are so many people. They smell so bad. Earlier, trains used to be really stinky. Many Han people traveled by train. Now it is better. Trains became cleaner, but all the same, I don't like them. Buses are better trains. There are fewer people. They are less crowded. This excerpt shows the typical course of many conversations. We usually started with actual practices. I asked about how you actually travel, after which the things would take a spontaneous turn to the discussion of preferences. This conversation was also characteristic in how it mapped notions of purity and dirtiness onto transport infrastructures. These notions also manifest in the next conversation, which took place between a Han Chinese businessman from Eastern China and an Uyghur bus driver. The Han Chinese businessman was on his virgin journey through Xinjiang to prospect for business opportunities, and this Han man and me, we were sitting in front of the bus next to the bus driver, trying to entertain him with conversation to prevent him from falling asleep during a long, monotonous journey, 7-hour journey through the Taklamakan desert. The conversation between the three of us drifted between various topics, as you can imagine, during a 7-hour ride. But like many others, it touched upon transportation too. So the Han businessman said, I came to Xinjiang by plane. When I first arrived, it was difficult. There are many Uyghurs here. I wasn't used to that. At the beginning, I had problems standing the way the Uyghurs smell. And then he said, for instance, like our driver here. And the Uyghur driver said, for you, our washing habits are difficult to accept. For us, other things are difficult. For example, we don't dare to travel by train. You, Han, do everything in one place there. Eat, pee, shit, use your hands without washing them. For us, this is insupportable. We find it disgusting. This chat between two total strangers reveals that perceived differences do not necessarily preclude other forms of cordiality. The shared aim of crossing the desert safely and the shared experience of unbearable heat on the bus made the words which in other circumstances could cause offense actually harmless. Both men smiled during this conversation, which after a few minutes moved to the next topic. And actually the two at the end of the journey exchanged their phone numbers in expectation of doing some potential future business together. Nonetheless, the statement of the driver, of the Uyghur bus driver, illustrates the disgust that some Uyghurs show towards the spatial arrangement of the train. Even the standard China-wide design of the train carriage itself itself, in which the bathroom is located right next to the sitting and sleeping compartments, can be considered improper and violating the Islamic spatial ideal that demands that the toilets should be separated from the living quarters. In long-distance buses, on the other hand, which in southern Xinjiang are usually owned and operated by the Uyghurs, the onboard toilets are unused and they are typically refunctioned into additional luggage space. To provide some measure of comfort, buses usually then stop at roadside toilet facilities. A few days after this conversation on the bus, I interviewed an Uyghur teacher in the oasis of Khotan in the far south of Xinjiang. When asked how he travels to the regional capital of Urumqi, a journey that takes around 24 hours by bus or around 35 hours by train, Mr. Ablimit said, "When I was a student, I went to Urumqi by train twice. Every other time I went by bus. I liked traveling by long-distance bus. There were many students on the bus, many beautiful girls too. I didn't like trains. It was very narrow and you were so close to people you didn't know. There were many Han on the train who ate their foods and smelled strange. Now I usually fly." So what you see here is that the rail travel was perceived as morally ambiguous by Mr. Ablimit and also other Uyghur interlocutors who associated trains with Han Chinese, or in the words of Mr. Ablimit here, the people you don't know. Traveling by train would bring Uyghurs into an undesired close proximity of Han Chinese, inserting them into the Han space. Apologies, I have something in my throat. So some Uyghur research participants argued that the spatial arrangement of trains was unacceptable, that they were full of strange people, and that the food served and consumed on the train smelled strangely. But also other elements converged for many of my Uyghur interlocutors in the idea of discomfort or inconvenience of travel that they felt. Consider, for example, the statement from Mrs. Raihan, an elderly Uyghur woman, a government employee at the time of our conversation. I asked her, "Do you fly when you travel in Xinjiang?" And Mrs. Raihan said, "Yes, I do. But I tell you, that is not a nice thing. There are only Han Chinese on the plane, no one to talk to. That is why I like traveling by long-distance bus. You can chat, you can ask the drivers to stop for praying, and they may do it. Of course, they also follow a timetable, but it is much more flexible. Uyghurs like to travel by bus. On the train, we feel uncomfortable. On the train, everything is in Chinese, all the announcements are in Chinese, and food is not halal." When we saw each other sometime later for another tea, Mrs. Raihan asked me, "Do you know this little mocking rhyme from back in the day? It went like this. As soon as the train signal sounds, Han migrants arrive in Xinjiang. A pole and 2 baskets on the shoulders, they loudly cry, 'Come and buy baby chickens for 1 kwai, for only 1 kwai and 3 cents.' And then she said, "This rhyme is originally in Chinese. It was invented by the local Han Chinese who, like us, didn't like the new Han migrants." Mrs. Raihan recounted that this verse was popular in the 1960s. I need a second. My apologies, I have an allergy. So Mrs. Raihan recounted that this verse was popular in the 1960s. When the railway from eastern China arrived in Xinjiang, she found that it revealed that from the beginning on, the trains in Xinjiang were associated with migration from eastern China, not only by the Uyghurs, but also by the so-called local Han who already lived there in multi-ethnic communities. This association between the railway and Han Chinese migration to and settlement in Xinjiang still prevails. And the next conversation with Mrs. Adalet, an elderly Uyghur woman from a small town of Aksu in southern Xinjiang, offers an example of how this association is typically made. So she said, Aksu has had a train line for a bit more than a decade. Since then, many Han started to come. And I asked her, and before that, were they not coming by bus? She said, no, there were very few of them. I don't know why. Maybe they like to come in large groups by train. They always follow the train line. My Han Chinese research participants associated trains with Han spaces as well, but their observation of this connection between railways and Han migration was not accompanied by signs of frustrations, as usually was the fact with the Uyghurs. On the contrary, it was for the Han Chinese interlocutors, the trains brought familiar people, so people familiar to them, that means other Han, to Xinjiang. It populated Xinjiang with the familiar people. It was quite interesting to discuss train travel with both ethnicities. Once I inquired, for example, with the bookstore owner, a Han Chinese owner of the bookstore that I frequented, why I was unable to buy train tickets. Whenever I wanted to buy train tickets, they seemed to be sold out. And this is what she said. In September, it is difficult to buy train tickets because Han cotton pickers are coming from other provinces. The government even reserves the whole trains from their place of origin to Xinjiang. About 300,000 people are needed every year for the cotton picking season. Next, there is the October national holiday, and train tickets are again hard to get hold of. Millions of migrant workers all over China go home for a holiday, including those in Xinjiang. Then, in November and December, the cotton pickers and construction workers go back to their home provinces for winter, and train tickets are once more sold out. Tickets are similarly impossible to come by around the Chinese New Year, which is either in late January or in February, or in March, in spring, when the construction workers are coming to Xinjiang. Mrs. Xie seriously suggested to me that if I wanted to travel by train, it was best to do it in March. For my Han interviewees, this connection between Han migration and trains was not problematic. On the contrary, as I mentioned, trains made for them Xinjiang feel less empty and populated it with people that they were familiar with. For the Uyghurs, although the association of the railway with the Chinese state and Han migration was evident, the actual experiences of travel by train were not uniformly negative. Especially some state-employed Uyghurs considered trains highly convenient. For example, during one of our conversations, Mr. Islam said, you know, Uyghurs like to go to Urumqi. Urumqi is the capital of Xinjiang. It has 30 higher education institutions. They also head to inner China to do business or to northern Xinjiang. With the train, it's very convenient. I either take the train or fly. I am a teacher. I can reimburse it. So teachers and other state employees can reimburse plane and train tickets. Train is much more convenient than long-distance bus. On the train, it is convenient to make namaz, which means to pray, and to read. There is a toilet. It is clean. There is more space. I mean, in the sleeper compartment. I always take the sleeper. On the bus, you can just lie down, you cannot read, it's bumpy, and the air is bad. It is also really inconvenient for praying. Experiences of rail travel are thus to a certain degree class and employment specific, whether state or private. What this excerpt also shows is that Mr. Islam's attempt to kind of reclaim trains as a space in which Uyghurs can also feel comfortably without becoming like the Han. Nonetheless, the general sense of insecurity relating to the social political changes of which the expanding railway is a sign, the sense of insecurity was not absent from the stories of people like Mr. Islam either. A feeling of uneasiness about what the augmented infrastructure investment and expanding transport networks would bring to the Uyghurs accompanied nearly every conversation that I had. The discussions were permeated by a diffuse feeling that the railway, in a much more straightforward way than roads, interestingly, was part of a political project. This political project for Uyghurs was palpable in daily life in the growing frequency of what I call undesired approximations. They observed more and more Han migrants, Han shops and restaurants, and the Chinese language moving into the previously Uyghur spaces, bringing Han Chinese and the Uyghurs closer than many Uyghurs actually wished. So to conclude, political and business actors advertise roads and railways built in Xinjiang in the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative and other development campaigns as clean material objects devoid of identity, as bundles of potentialities that generate the planned effects of developing this or that. But my research shows that those objects, like roads, are inherently enmeshed in the processes of ethnicity and in the tense debates on who Xinjiang belongs to, who should it belong to, who should be allowed to live there, and in what way. From the example of Israel and the Palestinian territories, perhaps best, we know infrastructures in places ridden with ethno-national conflicts are usually embroiled in those conflicts. They can be built in specific ways to discriminate, to exclude, or to bypass, like the Israeli West Bank wall or also wall at the US-Mexico border. My aim today was not to focus on the materiality of one specific infrastructure, but to highlight rather how every infrastructure tends to have a superfluity of meaning that exceeds its nominal function and intended effects, as Caroline Humphrey puts it. What does it mean? It means that an infrastructure is always much more than its materiality. This is because every infrastructure, already upon its design and even more prominently during the construction and its everyday life, enters a dense terrain of social relationships that have accumulated in the place where it's built over time. These accumulations are place and time specific, and they affect then the ways in which people perceive, use, and live with infrastructure. Sometimes, like in my field, because of the region's specific history, buses and trains will be ascribed quasi-ethnic identities. The ethnicization of transport infrastructure is one of those unplanned resonances created by the merging of transport technologies with this specific social political terrain of southern Xinjiang. Another such infrastructural resonance is the exclusion of the many Muslim inhabitants from the access to state-built roads and unhindered mobility. The government advertised purpose of infrastructure to connect and distribute wealth equally and on the other hand, what those roads actually do in southern Xinjiang are quite far apart. The categories of individuals, commodities, information, and capital permitted to travel along the roads and on railways in Xinjiang are strictly defined and monitored by the state. Many of the Turkic, Muslim, and in particular rural population are excluded from this freedom of circulation. So the Uyghurs in today's Xinjiang are stuck in very different ways than even a decade ago, when roads were in a much worse condition, but people were freer to move and there were not government disappeared of kin and relatives in every family. So the photographs of empty roads presented on the websites of Chinese state-owned construction companies, which I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, may thus, ironically, be taken as an actual illustration of the many exclusions enacted in relation to transport infrastructure. It appears that in the current reality, if not for thousands of trucks bringing in Chinese commodities from central China to Xinjiang and in turn taking Xinjiang's resources to inner China, Xinjiang expressways would be nearly empty. Thus, paradoxically, the more highways and railways that are built, the less people living in the region appear to be able to actually travel along them. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor.
For a very insightful speech on how infrastructure in Belt and Road Initiative takes shape and affect people and social relations in Xinjiang region. I think we will stop live streaming now. ช่วยปิดไลฟ์อะค่ะปิดไลฟ์ Okay, because we are going into the Q&A